They call it pink gold. Potash is a vital ingredient for growing food, and Canada has more of it than anywhere else in the world, with the largest reserves and production volume. It's now being touted as a secret weapon in this trade war with the United States.
They call it pink gold, but it's not jewelry. It's not diamonds. It's something hiding quietly under Canada's soil that can shake the world's food supply and bring the U.S. to its knees. Most people don't realize this, but in 2025, the Canada-U.S. trade war isn't about cars or semiconductors. It's about something far more basic: food, fuel, and steel. And Canada is playing its cards quietly, almost silently, but with devastating effect. So today, we're counting down 10 game-changing moves Canada is using against the U.S. in this new trade war. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for number 1, because that's where everything flips. Number 10, potash, the silent weapon beneath Canada's soil. Imagine a bag of fertilizer doubling in price overnight. That's exactly what happened in July 2025, when American farmers saw potash prices jump 38% in just 3 weeks. No drought, no global shortage. Just one quiet decision from Ottawa. Beneath Saskatchewan's flat prairies lies more than 1/3 of the world's potash reserves. Canada controls the largest supply and exports nearly 90% of U.S. demand. Without it, American corn and soybeans don't grow. Simple as that. So when the 47th president threatened a 35% tariff on Canadian imports, Ottawa didn't scream or retaliate. They just slowed shipments, quietly. The result? Iowa farmers canceled soybean planting. Ohio corn contracts sat unsigned. And Washington suddenly realized you can't win a food fight with the country that controls your fertilizer. Number 9. Farmers in crisis, the Midwest meltdown. Picture this: a family farm in Iowa, the Dwyers. 3 generations working 500 acres of corn. By July, they sat at the kitchen table staring at impossible math. Fertilizer costs were so high, they couldn't afford to plant half their fields. No protests. No angry march, just quiet despair. Across the Midwest, families like the Dwyers left land idle, canceled seed orders, and prayed for rain not to fall on fields that would remain barren. Here's the shocking part: the U.S. produces only 8% of its own potash demand, about 400,000 tons. The other 95% comes from imports, mostly Canada. Russia and Belarus used to contribute too, but sanctions cut them off, which means Ottawa holds the lifeline. Washington can tweet all it wants about supporting farmers. But without Canadian potash, American agriculture is a house without a foundation. And that's just the beginning. Number 8. Canada's energy pivot. LNG heads to Asia. While American farmers scramble, Canada quietly pulled its second card: energy. On July 17, 2025, a ship called the Gaslaw Glaf Kitimat, British Columbia, carrying the very first LNG Canada export. But here's the twist: it didn't go south to the U.S., it went west, straight to Asia. 10 days later, it reached its buyer half the time it takes shipments from the U.S. Gulf Coast. This wasn't just about gas. It was about power. For decades, U.S. leaders bragged about energy dominance, saying North America was unbeatable. But while Washington was busy tweeting, Canada spent nearly $40 billion building pipelines, terminals, and infrastructure. The result? For the first time in history, Canadian energy bypassed the U.S. completely, and the timing couldn't be worse. In June 2025, U.S. electricity prices spiked 6.7% year over year, double the rate of inflation. Families in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas are already feeling the squeeze. And now their northern neighbor is selling energy directly to Asia at a profit, while Americans pay more at home. That's not just trade. That's strategy. Number 7. The collapse of U.S. energy dominance. Remember that slogan? Unleash American energy. It was the backbone of U.S. policy under the 47th president. Oil, gas, coal, the works. But here's the problem. While Washington was busy making speeches, Ottawa was busy laying pipelines. The U.S. Gulf Coast still takes 20 days to ship LNG to Asia. Canada does it in 10. The math doesn't lie half the time. Lower costs and fewer risks. And here's where it really stings. In 2025, half of U.S. oil and gas executives told the Dallas Federal Reserve they expect drilling activity to decline. Why? Volatile prices, equipment tariffs, unstable trade policy. Meanwhile, Canadian projects are accelerating. Billions in LNG infrastructure, new westward pipelines, stable contracts with Japan, South Korea, and China. For years, the U.S. mocked Canada as just a branch plant energy supplier. But now, the roles are reversing. Canada is selling directly to Asia, while U.S. consumers face rising bills. Energy dominance? More like energy dependence. Number 6. The consumer squeeze, rising costs at home. This is where the story gets personal. In June 2025, US households saw electricity bills jump nearly 7% in a single year. That's double the inflation rate. Families are cutting back groceries, gas, even repairs just to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, diesel is trading at its highest price in nearly 8 years. Refineries are shutting down or reducing capacity. Rig counts are falling. And what does Washington do? Sign an energy emergency executive order that changes nothing. Because here's the truth. Paperwork doesn't power homes. Permits don't fill gas tanks. Tweets don't lower bills. The real energy is already moving on Canadian tankers across the Pacific into Asia's waiting markets. And here's the shocking part. Nearly 70% of Canadian crude oil and natural gas still goes to the U.S. But every new terminal, every new Asian contract chips away at that. Slowly but surely, Ottawa is diversifying. If Washington doesn't wake up, it risks losing not just cheap Canadian supply, but the global race for energy itself. Number 5. Canada's pipeline revolution. Pipelines aren't glamorous. They don't trend on Twitter. But they are power. While the U.S. fights over permits and court battles, Canada is building mile by mile, shovel by shovel. The massive Coastal GasLink pipeline is already moving gas across British Columbia to Kitimat, where LNG Canada loads tankers bound for Asia. That's not just a pipeline. That's leverage. Think about it. Every pipe buried in Canadian soil is another artery that bypasses the U.S. economy. For decades, American refineries relied on Canadian crude. Now, Asia is just as attractive, sometimes more. And here's what most people don't realize. Pipelines aren't just about fuel. They're about geopolitics. Whoever controls the flow of energy controls the leverage. In Washington, energy independence is a talking point. In Ottawa, energy diversification is a construction project. One is words. The other is welders, steel, and tankers already crossing the Pacific. Guess which one actually works? Number 4. Steel, Ottawa's bold rebuild strategy. And now, we shift from food and fuel to the very backbone of industry, steel. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canadian steel in 2025, everyone expected Ottawa to fight back with equal fury. Tariffs for tariffs, retaliation for retaliation. But Canada chose something far smarter. Instead of wasting energy on shouting matches, Ottawa quietly rolled out a 3-part plan. Quotas. Steel imports from non-free trade countries capped at 50% of last year's levels. Anything more? A crushing 50% tariff. Investment. $1 billion poured into modernizing Canadian steel plants through the Strategic Innovation Fund. Support. $70 million in job retraining plus $150 million for small and medium businesses in steel towns. The result? Steel mills in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie are roaring back to life. Workers who last year faced pink slips are now clocking back in. One welder put it clearly, "We're not retaliating. We're rebuilding." Meanwhile, in the U.S., steel mills are running at just 75% capacity, down sharply from their peak a few years ago. Modernization projects? Stalled. New plants? Nowhere. Ottawa is quietly securing its steel backbone, while Washington keeps pumping out press releases. And here's where the countdown gets even sharper. Because if steel is Canada's shield, then number 3 is America's Achilles heel. Number 3, America's steel decline, idle mills and broken promises. Now let's flip the coin. While Canada is rebuilding its steel backbone, the U.S. steel industry is struggling to hold the line. By mid-2025, American steel mills were running at just 75% capacity, down from nearly 90% a few years earlier. Why? Trade turmoil, rising raw material costs. And this part stings a lack of long-term investment. On Capitol Hill, the 47th president signed a memorandum to expand domestic steel capacity. It sounded bold, but guess what? No money, no real incentives, no regulatory relief. 4 months later, not a single new mill project had broken ground. Meanwhile, in Canada, plants in Hamilton and Quebec are already modernizing, thanks to government funding. Canadian projects are laying real steel. American projects are still just press releases. A steel worker in Pennsylvania summed it up. "We hear slogans every day, but parts are still expensive, no new mills. Just more promises." That's the reality. While Canadian furnaces are roaring again, American ones are cooling down. And here's the hidden danger. For every 4 tons of steel used in U.S. construction, 1 comes from Canada. If Ottawa even trimmed exports by 25%, projects from bridges in Michigan to auto plants in Ohio would grind to a halt. Washington can talk about tariffs all day long. But when the beams stop arriving, when the factories stall, that's when the truth hits. Number 2, Canada's smart quotas and domestic priority. This is where Canada showed real strategy. Instead of retaliating blindly, Ottawa reshaped the game. New quotas mean foreign steel, like from China or Turkey, faces crushing barriers. But U.S. steel? Thanks to trade agreements, it still flows across the border. That's not weakness. That's leverage. Ottawa basically said, we'll protect our industry, but we won't close the door on dialogue. At the same time, the Canadian government passed a rule. All federally funded infrastructure, bridges, hospitals, highways must use Canadian steel first. That means billions of dollars in projects locked in steady demand for domestic mills. Workers know their jobs are safe. Investors know their returns are secure. Think about that compared with the U.S. approach. Endless debate, unclear policy, stalled modernization. It's not retaliation. It's reconstruction. And it proves that Ottawa isn't just reacting. It's planning for the next decade. Number 1. The silent divorce. Has the U.S. lost its most reliable partner? And here we are. The most important, most overlooked change of all. For generations, Canada was the U.S.'s most stable, reliable trade partner. Fertilizer, oil, steel, you name it. If America needed it, Canada delivered. Quietly, steadily, without fuss. But in 2025, that foundation is shifting. Canada isn't shouting. It isn't slamming doors. It's simply diversifying. Selling LNG to Asia, strengthening steel for itself, tightening fertilizer exports when necessary. And here's the part most Americans don't realize. Ottawa doesn't need a fight to win. A whisper of scarcity, a pause in supply, a shift of contracts, and suddenly American farmers, manufacturers, and families feel the pain. In Iowa, cornfields go unplanted. In Ohio, auto plants face delays. In Texas, households pay record high utility bills. It's not a loud divorce. No slam doors, no angry tweets. It's silent, subtle, but very, very real. So here's the big question. Has the 47th president, in chasing headlines and tariffs, already lost America's most important trade partner without even realizing it? This isn't just about trade. It's about leverage. About who controls the inputs that keep farms running, homes warm, and factories moving. And right now, Canada holds more cards than most Americans or even their leaders are willing to admit. So what happens next? Will Washington keep playing politics while farmers, workers, and families pay the price? Or will it finally wake up to the reality that Canada is no longer just a quiet supplier, it's a strategic powerhouse? That answer will shape not just 2025, but the future of North American trade for decades. If you made it this far, you now understand the hidden game behind potash, LNG, and steel. Canada isn't shouting, but it doesn't need to. The quietest moves often carry the biggest consequences. So what do you think? Has the U.S. already lost Canada as its most reliable trade partner? Or is there still a chance to fix this relationship before it's too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Because in the weeks ahead, we'll be covering even more shocking updates about trade wars, energy crises, and global shifts that the mainstream media barely mentions. Stay tuned. The story isn't over yet.